Fall of the Berlin Wall. Built overnight on August 13, 1961, the Berlin Wall divided East Germany from West Berlin. Guard towers, barbed wire, and armed patrols turned it into one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. Its purpose was simple: stop East Germans from fleeing to the west. Over the years, thousands tried to escape. More than 100 people were killed attempting to cross. The wall became the most visible symbol of the Cold War, a world split between Communist East and Democratic West. By 1989, however, the system behind the wall was weakening. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments were facing protests and economic pressure. In East Germany, weekly demonstrations drew hundreds of thousands of people demanding reform, free travel, and political change. On the evening of November 9, 1989, East German officials announced new travel regulations at a televised press conference. A spokesperson, Günther Schabowski, read from a briefing note about allowing citizens to apply for travel permits. When a journalist asked when the policy would begin, Schabowski, uncertain, replied that it would take effect immediately. Within hours, thousands of East Berliners gathered at border crossings, expecting to be allowed through. The guards stationed at the checkpoints had received no clear instructions. As the crowds grew and pressure mounted, one checkpoint commander made a decision. Shortly before midnight, the gates were opened. People crossed freely into West Berlin for the first time in 28 years. The opening of the border set off rapid political change. East Germany's government soon collapsed. On October 3, 1990, less than a year later, East and West Germany were officially reunified. 9/11 attacks. On the morning of September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. The second impact made it clear. This was a coordinated attack. In total, 4 commercial airplanes had been hijacked by members of the extremist group Al-Qaeda. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense. Then, at 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. After passengers attempted to regain control, investigators later concluded the plane was likely headed for another major target in Washington, possibly the U.S. Capitol or the White House. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in the attacks. The impact was immediate and global. Airspace across the United States was shut down. Governments worldwide raised security levels. Within weeks, the United States launched military operations in Afghanistan, targeting Al-Qaeda and the Taliban regime that had allegedly sheltered its leaders. The attacks also led to sweeping changes in global security policy, intelligence coordination, airport screening, and counterterrorism strategy. It reshaped foreign policy, triggered long wars in the Middle East, and altered how nations approach security and surveillance. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary arrived in Sarajevo on the morning of June 28, 1914 for an official visit. The city was part of Bosnia, a region annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908. Many ethnic Serbs living there resented imperial rule and wanted independence or union with Serbia. Waiting along the Archduke's motorcade route were several young conspirators. They were members of a nationalist network connected to the group known as the Black Hand. Their goal was to assassinate the Archduke and strike a blow against Austrian control. The first attempt failed. One conspirator threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off the vehicle and exploded behind it, injuring members of the escort. Despite the attack, the visit went on. Later that morning, the Archduke decided to visit the wounded in a hospital. His driver took a wrong turn onto a side street. By coincidence, one of the conspirators, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, was standing nearby. Seeing the Archduke's car suddenly stop just a few feet away, Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots. One bullet struck Franz Ferdinand. The other hit his wife. Both were dead within minutes. The assassination set off a chain reaction among Europe's major powers. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and issued an ultimatum. By August 1914, Europe was at war. What began as a regional crisis became World War I, a global conflict that lasted 4 years, involved more than 30 nations, and led to the deaths of over 16 million people. Moon landing. On July 20, 1969, for the first time in human history, people walked on the moon. The mission was called Apollo 11. It was part of the United States Apollo program, launched during the Cold War space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. For years, both superpowers had competed to achieve major milestones in space. Reaching the moon and landing humans on its surface became the ultimate goal. On board were 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. On July 20th, Armstrong and Aldrin transferred into the lunar module named Eagle and began their descent toward the moon's surface. Michael Collins remained in orbit aboard the command module Columbia. After landing, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stayed on the moon for about 2.5 hours. The two astronauts walked on the lunar surface, conducted experiments, collected rock samples, and planted the U.S. flag. A television camera transmitted live images to Earth, watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. After completing their tasks, Armstrong and Aldrin returned to the lunar module, launched back into orbit, and reunited with Collins. The crew then began the journey home, safely splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The moon landing was a technological and scientific milestone. It demonstrated advances in engineering, computing, and space travel. It also symbolized what coordinated human effort and innovation could achieve. D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history. The operation was called D-Day. For years, Nazi Germany had controlled much of Western Europe. To defeat Hitler's forces, the Allied forces planned a massive invasion of German-occupied France. The goal was to open a Western front in Europe and begin pushing German forces back toward Germany. The invasion plan, known as Operation Overlord, targeted the coast of Normandy and northern France. Conditions were extremely dangerous. German forces had fortified the coastline with bunkers, mines, and artillery. Many soldiers were killed before they could even leave their landing craft. Despite the losses, units gradually pushed inland. By the end of the day, more than 150,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy. Thousands were killed or wounded, but the invasion succeeded in establishing a critical front in Western Europe. The Normandy landings marked the beginning of the end for Nazi control in Western Europe. Less than a year later, in May 1945, Germany surrendered, bringing World War II in Europe to a close. Birth of Jesus Christ. Around the end of the 1st century, a child was born in the region of Judea, then part of the Roman Empire. That child, Jesus of Nazareth, would become the central figure of Christianity. According to the New Testament Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the reign of King Herod the Great. His mother Mary and her husband Joseph had traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem due to a Roman census. While the exact historical details of the birth remain subjects of scholarly study and theological interpretation, most historians agree that Jesus was a Jewish preacher who lived in the 1st century CE in Roman-occupied Judea. Over the following decades, his teachings spread through his followers. By the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. Over time, it expanded across Europe, Africa, Asia, and eventually, the Americas. The birth of Jesus became the foundation of the Christian calendar system, traditionally dividing time into before Christ, BC, and Anno Domini, AD. Today, Christmas, the celebration of Jesus' birth, is observed by billions of people worldwide. Regardless of theological belief, the birth of Jesus stands as one of the most influential events in human history. Bolshevik Revolution. On November 7, 1917, a political uprising in Russia transformed global politics for much of the 20th century. Known as the Bolshevik Revolution, it brought the world's first large-scale communist government to power. At the time, Russia was exhausted by World War I. Millions of soldiers had been killed or wounded, food shortages were widespread, and the economy was collapsing. Earlier that year, in March 1917, the Russian monarchy had already fallen. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, ending centuries of imperial rule. Amid the instability, a political group called the Bolshevik, led by Vladimir Lenin, gained support. Their message was direct: end the war, redistribute land, and transfer power to workers' councils known as Soviets. On the night of November 6th to 7th, Bolshevik forces in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, moved to seize control of key locations. Their main target was the Winter Palace, where the provisional government was based. By the morning of November 7th, Bolshevik fighters and Allied soldiers surrounded and entered the palace. Members of the provisional government were arrested. Within hours, the Bolsheviks declared that power had been transferred to the Soviets. The revolution did not end the conflict in Russia immediately. A brutal civil war followed between the Bolshevik Red forces and their opponents, the Whites. The Bolsheviks ultimately won and established the Soviet Union. The creation of the Soviet Union reshaped global politics. It introduced a powerful communist state that would later become one of two superpowers in the Cold War.